Hello, everyone. This is Ben and Yanko. Welcome to our QX Financial podcast.
Good afternoon and welcome to episode 9 of QX Financial's podcast. How are you doing today, Yanko?
Very good, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's another beautiful day in sunny Southern California. And today, for our listeners, we have a very special guest, Phil Shekerlian. Phil is a estate planning attorney here in the state of California. Has been in the field of law for the last 10 years. Works in the area of estate planning, tax planning, probate, trust, contracts, and much more. And so I want to thank you for sharing some of your time with us today, Phil.
Thank you for having me on today. Like Benjamin just said, I've been doing this for over 10 years, and I've had my practice for about 7 years. Before I became an attorney, I ran many businesses. And most of those businesses were customer service oriented businesses, retail and restaurant type places. So I have a lot of customer service background, and I incorporated that into my practice. So my practice is a little more unique than most attorneys out there. Additionally, because I ran so many businesses, I have a very efficient business with low overhead. So I'm able to be very competitive and offer a top dollar service at a low price.
Oh, that's fantastic. Why don't you share with our listeners a little bit about your experience and kind of some of these businesses that you've worked in the past, and what led you to entering the field of law?
I've worked in restaurants as bartenders, servers, things along those lines, and then eventually worked my way up to management. I was working as a senior store manager at General Nutrition Centers for quite a while. Had 5 stores that I worked with, and I was on a board of directors for a pharmaceutical and biotech company.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And how did you decide to go from that sort of environment, which I imagine is quite different from what you currently do today?
Yeah, so all of those, you have to deal with compliance and legal issues, and so I started taking some law classes at Cal State Fullerton to get more information for the jobs that I was doing at the time. And I really became interested in law and decided to go to law school and become an attorney. And like most people out there, when I saw becoming an attorney, I thought of Ari Gold from Entourage, and I was going to be this big sports agent contract guy. And then when I got to law school and realized what that job entailed, I had no interest in it. So I ended up doing tax, business, and estate planning.
Oh, that's fantastic. Definitely appreciate you have a lot of experience, Phil. And I think for the purposes of today, I'm sure we could spend hours and hours talking to you about all different facets of law. But I think for today's purposes, it would be great if you could focus on areas specific to estate planning. I think estate planning is something that a lot of people, I'd say it might be fair to say, is dread talking about, thinking about, and a lot of people actually don't get around to doing their estate plan until they're maybe in their 50s or 60s. Maybe they're starting to think about retirement at this stage. What are some things that people should really kind of start to think about, some misconceptions, and why might it potentially be beneficial for somebody who's not, in their 50s or 60s to start thinking about this at an earlier age?
Well, part of the misconception is that estate planning is only for what happens when you pass away. But it's actually more. It's wealth building as well. You can't have assets to pass on to your heirs, and you can't leave a legacy if you haven't done a proper job during life making sure there is something to pass on. So it's really important when you're in your 20s and 30s to start the process so that you can make sure that you're not only providing yourself an adequate retirement, but you're providing something to pass on to your heirs and to leave a legacy behind.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think a common comment or suggestion that I get from younger people who are more or less our age. We're both in our 30s. Actually, Jonko as well, as we're all in our 30s. And most people who are in their 30s, if they're not married, no kids, and that sort of thing, say, hey, I don't really have any assets. It's just me. Maybe it's my spouse, partner. But if I die, everything's just going to go to them. So what's the big deal?
Yeah, so that's not necessarily the case. If you are married, then yes, it would pass on to your spouse. But there can be it can be a little more difficult process if you don't have all the paperwork in place at the time. And if something were to happen to you and your spouse at the same time, then your family's going to have to go through probate. And so you definitely need to have some type of plan set in place.
Is it really a big deal if the estate has to go through a probate process? What does that look like?
Yeah, so for those that aren't familiar, the probate process is essentially the court supervising the distribution of your assets. You have to file a petition, get appointed by the court, and then the entire process takes anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. And then there's large fees associated with it. You have filing fees, publication fees, all the fees that go hand in hand with having any type of suit in court, as well as there's a percentage of the estate that goes to people working on it. The executor, the attorneys, the valuators of any assets, they all get a percentage of the case, and it ends up costing tens of thousands to even hundreds of thousands of dollars to go through a probate.
Okay, so how much, I know just depending on the circumstances, you could have a relatively simple process with doing kind of this estate planning work for individuals that don't necessarily have a lot of assets. It's not very complicated, that sort of thing, versus, maybe people who have lots of business entities, complexities of that nature. I think most people, or the average person, is kind of oblivious as to how complicated or simple these sorts of things can be, and I think people have very wide expectations of oh, well, I just need a will, that should just cost a few $100s, I can just do that on the internet. What is sort of an appropriate way of looking at that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of misconceptions there. One is that a will is almost pointless in California. If you have a will, it doesn't avoid probate. You have to have a trust to avoid probate. In addition to that, the estate planning process, it can be as simple as you want it to be or as complex as you want it to be. It's a plan that you can custom tailor sitting down with your professionals, your financial advisor, your attorney, your CPA, and putting this plan in place so that everything happens the way you want it to happen when you retire and when you pass away. If you don't sit down with the professionals and you just guess, like you said, hey, I can go online and do a will, well, most people think that's enough, and it's not. Most estate planning attorneys, financial advisors, CPAs, they'll offer a free consultation. So it doesn't make much sense to try to figure it out on your own when you can go seek out the help from a professional for free.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other kind of key points that people should know about beyond the financial areas of why it's important to kind of have an estate plan in place?
Yeah, there's several components of the estate plan. One of them is the trust and avoiding probate and the financial part of it. But I think the most important part is actually the nomination of guardians. If you have children under the age of 18 and something were to happen to both parents at the same time, then somebody has to step in and take care of those children. If the families of mom and the families of dad end up fighting each other over who gets to care for those children, then the kids become wards of the state and they go into the foster care. I've seen situations where, for instance, mom's family is not very well off, but they have kids of their own. They live locally. The kids could stay in the same schools, have the same friends. But father's family is a little more well off, can provide more adequate means for the kids to live, but they live in another state. And so the families end up fighting over who's more adequate to raise those children, and then the kids go into foster care, and a court battle ensues that takes years to resolve. If you have this simple nomination of guardians, you can nominate who's going to take care of your kids, and this mess never happens.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's definitely something It's very important to think about, and it was interesting. Jonk and I were having this conversation, just maybe an hour or so ago, and actually, what originally had made me think of it was an episode of South Park. But I guess there was Terry Schiavo, I think, was in the state of Florida, and there was a bit of an issue around. If I'm recalling correctly, she was a lady who lived in Florida. They didn't necessarily have an estate plan in place. I didn't have any medical directives or anything of that nature. And so the wife's family were fighting the husband over the husband saying that the wife's wishes were for her to have the life support removed, quote unquote, the plug to be pulled. I think a lot of people have misconceptions about what does it mean to, quote unquote, pull the plug, and why is it important to have, a medical directive, things of that nature in place, so that there's a clear understanding of under what circumstances does a person want to continue to receive medical care or not want to receive medical care.
Yeah, that's another important component of an estate plan is the Advanced Healthcare Directive. Some people are familiar with something called a living will, which is actually a portion of the Advanced Healthcare Directive. And then there's several other parts of the Advanced Healthcare Directive, and they cover issues like whether or not to pull the plug, whether or not you want to be buried or cremated, whether or not you have any religious beliefs or anything preventing you from taking pain medication, if you have allergies to medications, things along those lines. Do you want to donate organs? All those decisions. And if you don't have it, you could end up with, like you said, the Terry Schiavo case, which was a horrible tragedy. That went on for, I believe, 7 to 8 years, where that was battled in court. The whole time she was on life support in a vegetative state with no chance of ever coming back. And the family spent probably hundreds of thousands of dollars going through all levels of court over those 7 years, battling as to whether or not she had to remain on life support or whether or not she could be taken off of it. And this simple document can avoid that.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonko, is there any particular questions that you have for Phil, or areas that you think would be relevant to discuss?
Yes, I want to talk a little about the financial area, because that's really where a lot of what we do focus on, the listeners of our podcast focus on. So tell us more about how does the estate planning attorney and the financial advisor work together? What are those areas that you see where there's a lot of overlapping financial planning that needs to be done alongside the estate planning?
Yeah, it's like I mentioned earlier, you can't leave a legacy if you don't have anything to leave behind. So it's very important to have a financial planner to make sure that you have enough to survive on when you do retire and enough to leave behind if that's your goal and desire. Some people wish to be charitable when they pass away, which is a great way for getting tax benefits now, but it's also a way to feel great about what you've done and to leave a legacy behind. Other people want to make sure that their kids are provided for if something happens to them, and most people are living day to day, paycheck to paycheck, and that's not possible. If something were to happen, you don't have a whole lot to leave to your kids, especially if you have young children and you are in that situation. Life insurance is an extremely important component to doing that, to make sure that there is something to care for them if you're not around to do it.
That is very true. Okay. And I know you mentioned earlier that a very common misconception is that, well, I have a will, that means I don't need a trust, or I can just go to Zoom, right, online and just do it
Legal Zoom.
And do it myself. And you mentioned a couple of areas, but besides that, is there any other typical things that you hear from clients to, okay, well, why do I need to do this? I mean, in my experience, what I hear a lot is like, well, I'm not wealthy enough to worry about the estate tax, so why should I have a estate plan? Do you get anything like that? Like very...
Yeah, absolutely. I hear a few things. One, I'm not wealthy enough, and honestly, in California, it doesn't take a whole lot to be wealthy enough to need an estate plan. If you own a home or you have a 401k, anything significant like that, you're probably in need of an estate plan. Otherwise, you're facing a costly probate for your family. The other one is the estate tax. Yeah, it's extremely high right now, but that's a good thing. It allows for planning for the future. The estate tax is not something that stays the same, for the rest of your life. It's going to change. It's going to go up and down as time goes on. And now is a good time to plan while it's extremely high, because you can take advantage of the additional gifts that you can give to make sure that you don't face an estate tax if the value does go down in the future. I've been doing a lot of that planning lately. for moderately wealthy clients, people that are in the $1 million to $2 million range of net worth, including their homes, which is most people in Orange County that own a home.
Yeah, most people don't remember that back in the 90s, the state tax was $1 million.
Absolutely.
So meaning that in today's money, you own a home in a fairly nice area, and sometimes not even a nice area. You're already almost there at the state tax level. So that's very true.
And then back to what you were saying about the misconceptions about just going to LegalZoom or there's document preparers out there that'll do it really cheap. It goes back to what I was saying is you have to have somebody that knows what they're doing. There's a lot of situations that you can put into a trust, even if you do it online or through a document preparer. But the online and the document preparer can't give you legal advice. So they can't say, well, if you put that in there, these could be the consequences. And what do you want to do if that's going to happen? And a lot of times I see people with, document prep wills or trusts or online wills or trusts, and their family ends up in litigation because of the will or trust where they wouldn't have if there wasn't even one in place. So it makes the situation worse.
Yep.
You always want to have the right professional help, and you want to make sure you have somebody that knows all the what ifs and what all the potential consequences of each individual clause in your estate plan could mean, and then also somebody that knows what the tax ramifications and asset protection ramifications are going to be. You don't want to end up costing your family more in taxes because you did improper planning.
That is very true. This is not an area of do-it-yourself.
Not at all.
Kind of thing.
Very, very complicated, and even a lot of estate planning attorneys out there don't understand the full ramifications. They don't know the tax implications and the asset protection implications of it, and they don't work with financial advisors and CPAs. They just do it on their own, and so there's not a full, complete plan in place where all the professionals are talking to each other.
Most definitely. Another area that we found with clients, and maybe you can speak to this on your experience, is on special needs planning. Clients with children that have autism or Down syndrome or things of the sort. That's something that we have helped our clients quite a bit about. Can you speak a bit of your experience on the special needs? Why is that important? I mean, it may seem obvious if you have a child with a situation, but for those that we don't, speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called supplemental needs planning today, but it applies to more than people that just have children with special needs. This could be for anybody that's collecting welfare benefits, anyone that's on Section 8 housing, anybody receiving any disability pay, and even people on Social Security. If those people receive benefits from the government, especially special needs under the ADA Act, they're getting government money to help them survive. Well, if you inherit money, or anybody gifts you money, or you have some kind of lawsuit where you win money, that money that you receive can disqualify you from those government benefits. So you need to have a plan in place to make sure that you can still receive that money and get your benefits. And that's entirely possible through the use of supplemental needs trusts. There's different types of them and different ways to set them up, but if you sit down and put the right plan in place, you can get the best of both worlds rather than hurting yourself.
That is true. Does that apply also for example, to retirees that are getting medical or SSI benefits, and now there's a transfer of wealth? They can find themselves also in an issue like that? Absolutely,
yeah. SSI and Medi-Cal are along the same lines. Medi-Cal especially, if you're receiving Medi-Cal during your life and Medi-Cal pays out any benefits on your behalf, if you don't have a proper plan put into place when you pass away, Medi-Cal is going to come back after your assets and take them from your family, so you're not going to be able to pass them along. But if you do the right plan, then you can keep those assets in your family.
Exactly. And one last thing that I have here in my notes to talk about how this affects the everyday regular person is long-term care, right? And it's similar along the lines of Medi-Cal, where if you're on Medicare, that is long-term care is not covered by Medicare. However, the state can pay for that, but not if you have assets.
Yeah, and the costs are astronomical for long-term care. Assisted living facilities can charge anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000 a month here in California. And honestly, if you're on the low end at the $4,000 range, you're probably not in a great home, and who wants to put their family in a situation like that? So most people don't have $10,000 a month to pay for their rent after they've retired on a fixed income. So it's important to have that planning done ahead of time, whether it be that you're going to have to go on Medi-Cal and make sure that any assets you have are protected, or that you need get a long-term care insurance policy, or that you put it on as a rider to your existing life insurance policy, whatever the case may be.
And how will you have a coach me better on this because I don't want to go into specific advice. I want to keep it big picture. But if you have a family member like a mother or a father that is on long-term care supported by the state, and they pass away, what happens to the assets when they go to the heirs?
Yeah, like I said, if it's not if there's not a proper estate plan in place, then the Medi-Cal will come collect whatever money they're owed that they paid out during that person's life before you get your inheritance.
Exactly.
But if you have that correct plan, then you get the full inheritance, and Medi-Cal does not reclaim any of that.
Exactly, and I know for a lot of you guys, our ladies, our men and women that are listening to this podcast, for a lot of us, it's a hard conversation with our parents or grandparents to have, right? A lot of parents are very private, if I can use that word. They don't want to tell the children what's going on, and we may know as sons and daughters that there's no proper planning, but it's definitely worth to bring it out to them and say, hey, I'm not trying to keep the house or anything like that, but can we have a conversation? It's so important because that can affect you. I have too many stories about clients where now they're taking care of their parents, now they're taking care of their grandparents, and my clients are 65, they're 67, but 85-year-old great grandma needs to be with them because again they can't afford to put them in hospice care or in a long-term care facility.
Yeah, that's a tough conversation to have, and that's probably the hardest part about doing an estate plan is having that conversation with the right family members and making sure that everything's in place. An estate plan is not so much for you as it is for your heirs. So it's, if your children are worried about it, they have a hard time figuring out how to bring up the subject. It's not something you want to be discussing at Christmas dinner and ruining the atmosphere. So it's, us professionals, we have ways of helping you talk to your family about it and bringing them in and saying, hey, these are things that need to be done. Have you ever considered these? So sometimes hiring a professional can help you have that hard talk where you don't get that if you're doing it yourself online.
Exactly. That's kind of what I was going, where Phil can go out and Yanko can go out there, Ben can go there and start that conversation, so you don't have to, right? Because we are the ones that understand and have experience of how to have the conversation professional, respectfully, and trying to give them the answer that they're looking for, right? For sure. You have another question, Ben?
Oh, sure, yeah. Just before we wrap things up, I think something that may be a benefit to some of our listeners is there's a lot of specific legal terms when it comes to estate planning, and I think some of the common ones that people have concerns or questions about or don't really understand what does that mean involve things like power of attorney, the executor of a trust, what's a trustee, what's a trustor, revocable versus irrevocable trusts. Are there some common terms like some of those, Phil, that you think would be useful in kind of explaining what some of those things are?
Yeah. So trusts, in a nutshell, are a contract between several different parties. The person that creates the trust, they're called the trustor or the settlor. That they get to decide what all the terms are in the trust and what's going to happen while they're alive, after they pass away, and for generations to come. The person that actually manages the assets in the trust is not necessarily the trustor. It can be, but sometimes it's not. But that person's title is actually called the trustee. And if it's a business, you think of them as not the owner, but just the manager to take care of the assets for somebody else's benefit. Well, the people that are going to benefit from the trust, they're called the beneficiaries. They're the ones that are either going to collect the income from the trust or receive the assets at some future date from the trust. Nowadays, there's some more complex concepts as well, and you can have something called a trust protector. And the trust protector is an extra layer to basically audit what's going on in the trust and make sure that the wishes of the settlor or the trustor or the creator of the trust are being met, and if they're not, making changes to ensure that those wishes are being met. And now a trustee is the manager of a trust, whereas an executor is the manager of a will. They're the ones that take care of the probate process. And here, actually, in California, the executor is called a personal representative. And then, what were some of the other terms you discussed?
Power of attorney.
Yeah, so power of attorney is one of the documents that's part of an estate plan, along with the healthcare directive, nomination of guardians, and the trust. And that power of attorney is for a situation where you are unable, whether it's physically or mentally, to manage your own finances and pay your bills. You can nominate somebody to have access to your bank accounts and money so that your health insurance can be paid, your mortgage or rent can be paid, and that when you do recover that you have a home to return to and you don't have astronomical medical bills to pay. And then what was the other one you'd mentioned?
Let's see. Maybe it was executor of a trust. I guess revocable versus irrevocable.
That's correct. Yeah. So a revocable trust is typically referred to as a living trust. It's the one that most people get. That's the one that avoids probate and basically says what's going to happen to your assets when you pass away. A revocable trust is just that. It's revocable. You can change it, you can amend it, you can completely revoke it at any point in time. You are the one in charge of your assets as long as you want to be or as long as you're alive. And then when you pass away, you nominate somebody else to be the trustee and who the beneficiaries are. Irrevocable trusts are for special purposes. You are generally not going to be the trustee, but sometimes you can be. Those are for situations like the supplemental needs trust that we spoke of earlier. There's tax ramifications for doing a irrevocable trust. You can save on state and local taxes. You can save on income taxes, capital gains taxes. There's ways to protect your assets if you fear that there's somebody's going to sue you from a business or for a car accident or for whatever reason, or if you owe money to creditors and they're coming after you. You can put your assets into these trusts as long as it's before the anticipated creditor comes after you, and you can protect those assets from those creditors. And then there's several other reasons to have irrevocable trusts as well. But like it suggests, for the most part, they're irrevocable and you can't change them. And once you set it in motion, it's got to stay there. Although there's sometimes ways around that.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, and so the last thing I would like you to share with the listeners is more about a little bit of the business side, because we're in Southern California right now. The entrepreneurial culture is going up the roof. We know that 75% of employment in the U.S. is from small and medium-sized businesses. A lot of people, they just go out and start their new app, their new business, and they don't think about these things. So maybe a trust is not the right way, but why will they have to keep an eye on the legal side of things, based on your business experience as they go in business?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to consider when you go in business, and it's really difficult to do to start up a business properly and use all the experts that you really need to make that business run right. You have to have some capital to get things started. But one of the main concerns you want to think about is that asset protection. If your business is something where you could be sued for running that business, you want to make sure that your home is protected and that nobody can sue you and try to take all your equity or the majority of the equity out of your home. Additionally, you want to make sure that you're paying as little in taxes as possible and taking advantage of every opportunity that's out there to reduce your taxes. And then the last thing is succession planning. What's going to happen to that business if you're disabled or if you die? Who's going to take over? Who's going to inherit the business and actually own it? But is that person also capable of running the business or running your part of the business? Or is there somebody else that's better for that situation? And so that's part of the whole estate plan in general, is that type of succession and tax planning as well.
I think that is so crucial, because a lot of our clients, sometimes they think, well, my business is my retirement plan. And I always like to ask them, okay, if I remove you from the business, what happens? In a lot of cases, as you're saying, I remove the owner from the business, there's no business.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's why succession planning, having some sort of a structure that becomes important.
Yeah, and again, there's insurance out there for those situations as well. For if you're disabled and not able to work, or if your partner's disabled, or whatever the case may be, or if you pass away, and there's ways to make sure that you are covered and your family's covered in the event something catastrophic happens to you and you can't use it as your retirement.
Most definitely. Okay. Well, we really appreciate your time, Phil. It's really, really helpful. So if they want to get a hold of you, do you have a website, phone number, email address, something that you would like to, if they have a question for you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Absolutely. Feel free to reach out and contact me. I'll give you my contact information in a minute, but I'm always available to answer quick questions. I do free consultations as well, so if you want to schedule a time to see if you need an estate plan or any of the other things we've talked about, tax planning, succession planning, things along those lines, you can contact me and we can set that up. My phone number is 949-233-2894. My email is ineedalawyernow@yahoo.com. So that's pretty easy to remember.
Right.
And then you can visit my website for additional information or to book an appointment. It's CaliEstatelaw.com.
All right.
Fantastic. And we'll definitely put that down in the description for all of you so it's easier for you guys to remember. And well, we want to really thank you for your time and coming in and meeting with us. And as we do more of this, hopefully we can have you back for a different legal subject matter.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I'd love to come back.
All right. Thank you so much, Phil.
Have a good one.
The views and opinions expressed in the QX Financial Podcast series do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of How Natural Equity Sales Company or affiliated company. Before making any decisions concerning your personal or business financial situation or decisions concerning the information contained herein, you should consult a competent licensed professional. No offer, solicitation, or specific investment advice expressed or implied is being provided, and this podcast series and the information contained herein should not be regarded as such. Securities offered through the ON Equity Sales Company, member FINRA SIPC, One Financial Waste in Ohio 45242. Phone number 513-794-6794. Benjamin Morgan offers investment advisory services through ON Investment Management Company on Inc. Phil Shekerlian is not affiliated with the ON Equity Sales Company or ON Investment Management Company.